So many videos on this channel explore the imbalance that modern humans experience because we rely far too much on left brain processing. And we haven't really explored how we got here. What happened in culture that brought us to this point? Because if you explore that, you might be able to explore a remedy for it. And this is true even with Ian McGilchrist. I forget it, it's 600, 800 pages, The Master and His Emissary, which again sets up a perfect parable. I think it was Nietzsche who talked about a very harmonious town, the king, everything worked beautifully, and things got more complex. So the king hired an emissary, help him with all the bureaucratic details. Then this emissary got a little egotistical and thought they were running the show. And that's really what's happening with modern humans. And so basically it all comes down to the way the right brain processes information, but we have this helpful left brain, the bureaucrat that sort of works on the details. But now this detail servant has now become the master, or at least it believes itself to be so. But even he didn't really go into the details. And we can look at modern culture and describe this imbalance, our dependence on language, this reliance on categorization, interpretation over reality, and how our interpretations are now in and of themselves proof that they are on the mark, and we don't look for external sources. So anyway, in this video, what I want to explore is how did we get here? And it's not going to be obvious. It's not intuitive at all. And it's going to be based on a paper by Stephen Chrisman. He's at the University of Toledo and was my mentor. And in his lab, all things left-right brain were explored. And of course, they're still doing this. I graduated in '96, so they are very much into The Master and His Emissary and all the work of Ian McGilchrist. But they point out that he doesn't really do an adequate job explaining how. How did we get here? What do you do in a culture to create imbalance relying on the left brain? So in this video, I'm going to go over a couple, not the whole paper, but most of it, the basic idea of non-intuitive things that can really bring about imbalance. And of course, once these are explored, you can fix it. And I'll give a couple fixes with this. One really non-intuitive shift in culture is that from standing, walking, basically being up all day, walking around, and rarely sitting. So sitting, even in more recent history, it was for rich people. It was a luxury. Most people were up and about. And in fact, the paper references that there's an estimate that our hunter-gatherer ancestors probably put in about 17,000 steps a day. I think that's an underestimate, because if you ever put on 20,000, you could put on 20, 25,000 steps in a day if you're just walking around all day. And that's, of course, what they did. Modern humans are lucky if they put on 5,000 steps a day. And so that's a huge shift. And so what is this? How does this affect the brain? Well, it turns out that even standing is highly dependent on the right brain. So people who have a right brain stroke, they can no longer stand. They can't get themselves up from a sitting position to an upright position. And the act of walking around is, I've talked about EMDR, this shift from left to right, and that brings about a right hemisphere increase. And when you think about walking around, left foot, right foot, and of course you're activating the contralateral hemisphere each time you take a step. And so walking alone is something that has been a huge shift. And you can work on this. And of course, the right brain is far more embodied. And what that means is it's far more connected with bodily sensation. So all of these meditations, whether it is Tai Chi, yoga, you're shutting down the narrative left brain and just being in the body in the moment. And of course, there has been these are more popular now because we've picked up on this imbalance, and whether we consciously or egotistically recognize it or not, we know yoga seems to bring about imbalance. Tai Chi brings about balance. And so one of the things, very easy fix, one of the things I do is because I drive, I would really prefer to organize a culture where I didn't have to drive very much. I could walk to the store. But as things are, if I want to go shopping, I have to go to a store. But you can still park. It's far away from the entrance as possible. And it's one little trick. And they also have these stands. So instead of sitting, as I am now, at a desk, you can stand at a desk. And standing requires a lot more balance. It engages the right brain to a higher degree. So don't sit so much, and do your own estimation. See how much you're sitting a day. And that is not intuitive. It's not obvious that standing will bring about a right brain shift. We're indoors far more than our ancestors, more than ever. Every day we set a new record for being indoors more than the previous day. And the indoors are very interesting because, and again, Ian talks about this in his book, that the right brain is specialized for nature. The left brain is specialized for human-made objects. In fact, there's only one exception, musical instruments, where even though they're made by hand, if you're lucky, the right brain still treats them like they're alive, which of course they are. But nature has all kinds of wiggles to it. And it's true, if you go out into the woods, and they've done studies where they'll look if there's a bias of orientations, and it turns out there is. And then you can connect with this, because if you go out, there's a bunch of trees, and so these are all vertical. And there's also landscapes, there's oceans and horizons, which are all horizontal. And so that is a bias in nature, but it's just a slight bias. So nature still has lots of wiggles in it. But we've ironed those out, and that's what the left brain does with categories. There's all these exceptions. The left brain just ignores all those little wonderful anomalies, and it just straightens everything out, makes it clean. Things are black and white. And that's why when you look around, everything indoors, it's all 90-degree angles. Everything's perfect. And you could see how architecture has even changed more and more, even in 1 or 2 generations. So if you go back to some of these old houses, I love looking at like 100-year-old houses because they still have parts in them that are at least round here and there. You know, these castle-like windows that at least have some roundness to them. And now we finally ironed them out too, making everything 90-degree angles, nice and straight, just like the left brain likes it. And of course, if you're indoor all day, you're activating the left brain, and you're not bringing about that balance. And working together versus working alone. The right brain is all about reading other people's minds, experiencing other people's emotions, and some of it's strategic, trying to figure them out. And when we work together, as a tribe, as a group, you had to deal with people. You know, was it Sartre said other people were hell, and they're just tough to figure out. And so that's a right brain task that the right brain specializes in. Now, and I think about how much worse it's gotten the last couple of years, 5 years or so. So many people are now working from home, cutting out that social element. And that, again, is increasing our dependency on the left brain. But I think there's a couple other things that are even outside of the paper, and I even mentioned this to Steve, maybe, another paper might be in the works, because there are other things that we've shifted to recently that could even further escalate that left brain imbalance. One is grounding. And so there's a wonderful paper. It's the physiological effects of earthing or grounding. And some researchers, I talked about this in another video, but they just wanted to explore what's going to happen if we ground someone. And grounding is when you take your shoes and socks off and you electrically connect with the earth. And we know this is important. All of the outlets in your house, they all have a ground. And all that is, it's no mystery or metaphor. That plug at the bottom, the single plug at the bottom, that just goes into the earth and it grounds that electrical charge. And we are, of course, electrical beings. Our brain is 3 pounds of electrical processing units. Every time a neuron fires, that's an electrical event. And so it certainly is plausible that our ancestors, of course, were always connected with Earth. And in fact, it was only about maybe 100, I think it was before the Second World War or after, that we started isolating ourselves, insulating ourselves with these rubber-soled shoes. And that cuts off the electrical charge completely. And so for the most part, most of us are disconnected from that grounding our electrical charge because we were We wear rubber-soled shoes. We don't sleep on the earth anymore. Our ancestors, in fact, if you look at beds, that goes back, in fact, predates humans. Animals have made beds for themselves. But these were all leaves, and they were things that were still strongly connected with the earth. Now, 6-8 hours, we're sleeping maybe 3 stories above the earth in a bed that's completely disconnected. And so anyway, these authors wanted to explore this, so they put the electrodes on subjects, and they had a very interesting, very controlled way to manipulate it. So instead of just having them walk out on Earth, which the subjects would know, and maybe there's some placebo effect, they had a mat, and I've got all these mats when I'm writing, my feet, on these mats, so I'm grounded, and they're not even that expensive. But they use this as an experiment. So the experiment could flick a switch and you're grounded, turn the switch off and you're not. The effects were absolutely instantaneous in terms of the left brain. The left brain had radical changes every time they were grounded. And of course, this is nicely set up experimentally because it's not something the subject even knew was going on. And there was a trend. It wasn't highly statistically significant, but there's a trend where the left brain slowed down every time the grounding was applied. And then there's a good reason for this, because if you look at the data, for some people, the effect was really pronounced. But in a few people, it was actually going the other direction. So what that means in science, you just have to figure out what that other variable is. How are you going to control for that? And so maybe grounding won't work for everybody, but it seems like it works for most people. And you can fix this. Maybe it's hard right now in the winter, but you can get these mats, and you can in the summer. When I taught my mindfulness class, the students, we took our shoes and socks off, we walked around campus, and it didn't go over well because we are enculturated. These shoes just seem to be, as long as our ancestors really went without shoes, as soon as we put them on, it stuck. But there are two other things I'll mention that changed very recently. One is, we used to have 2 worlds, a daylight and a nighttime, and we spent time at night. And in fact, the physiology of the eye reflects this. So we have cones for daytime, very clear, sharp vision, and at night, the rods take over. And the reason this might be important, and the reason it might increase the left brain, is because the left brain focuses on details, visual details, sharp edges. And of course, these are present in daylight. At night, when you shut the lights off and you go out into the dark, we only see general shapes. And that's low spatial frequency information, just a general shape. And that's, of course, specialized by the right brain. So in other words, our ancestors got all this right brain activity at night when they would wander around before they would sleep. We don't get that. And so this is an easy fix. And we do this. It gets so dark so early. At 5 o'clock, it's dark. But it's still easy to go for a walk in the dark. And it's just something that culture has just shifted us away from, because we have so much artificial light. We don't feel comfortable anymore walking around in the dark. But you are physiologically adapted to do this. Dark adaptation will take place. And it will give your right brain a little bit more activation. Another thing is artificial changes, or not changes, by artificially controlling the temperature. Our ancestors experienced radical shifts in temperature every day. And we suddenly now have complete control, where most of us will go around 70 degrees almost the entire day. And our ancestors just didn't live in that world. And I don't know, I don't have the data, this is speculation, but I'm going to guess that ability to deal with those radical shifts was probably something to deal with the right brain. The right brain was probably more involved in that. But now the right brain has nothing to do. We don't deal with those shifts anymore. We have a nice, continuous 72 degrees. And we're not giving the right brain what it was originally designed to do. These radical shifts in temperature, shifts in daylight, walking around all the time, dealing with others and working it out with others. And so I hope you find that those are some non-intuitive, but eventually could be very helpful to just a little bit. Sometimes, again, the left brain deals with these categorical, I got to do all this. But change can happen. And it's not change it's really going back to what is natural for us human beings. And we can get back to that place by making a few small changes.